The salt-kissed winds of the Caribbean carried both promise and peril as Eleanor Blackwood stepped onto the creaking deck of the Crimson Serpent. Desperation had driven her here, a woman with nothing left but her wits and a stolen set of men's clothing. Captain James Hawthorne ruled this vessel with an iron will and a fearsome reputation. His crew respected him, his enemies feared him, and the Royal Navy hunted him across every sea. Eleanor kept her head down, scrubbing the weathered planks until her hands bled, certain that discovery meant death. She never expected the captain's piercing blue eyes to see through her disguise, nor the proposition that would fall from his lips when he cornered her in the shadows of the gun deck. The salt-kissed winds of the Caribbean carried both promise and peril as Eleanor Blackwood stepped onto the creaking deck of the Crimson Serpent. Desperation had driven her here, a woman with nothing left but her wits and a stolen set of men's clothing. Captain James Hawthorne ruled this vessel with an iron will and a fearsome reputation. His crew respected him, his enemies feared him, and the Royal Navy hunted him across every sea. Eleanor kept her head down, scrubbing the weathered planks until her hands bled, certain that discovery meant death. She never expected the captain's piercing blue eyes to see through her disguise, nor the proposition that would fall from his lips when he cornered her in the shadows of the gun deck. What happens when a woman with nothing to lose becomes the obsession of a man who takes what he wants? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor's knuckles were raw as she plunged the wooden brush into the bucket again. Salt water stung the cracks in her skin, but she bit her lip and continued. 3 days aboard the Crimson Serpent had taught her that complaints meant the lash. "Put your back into it, boy." The quartermaster, Silas Reed, stood over her, his shadow stretching across the worn planks. "Captain wants this deck clean enough to eat off before we reach the shipping lanes." "Yes, sir," Eleanor mumbled, keeping her voice low and gruff. The binding around her chest made it difficult to breathe in the humid air, but it was a necessary discomfort. Discovery would mean certain death. The weathered trunk of men's clothing she'd found on the docks had been her salvation. The previous owner, a sailor whose luck had run out in a tavern brawl, had no more use for them. His misfortune had become her disguise and her only chance at survival after her father's public execution for treason against the crown. "You there, new boy." A burly sailor with arms thick as tree trunks gestured to her. "Fetch more water from the barrel." Eleanor nodded, keeping her face partially hidden beneath the brim of her worn cap. She hoisted the bucket and made her way carefully across the rolling deck. The ship was alive beneath her feet, cutting through the azure waters with purpose and speed. From the quarterdeck, she felt eyes upon her. Captain James Hawthorne stood at the helm, one hand resting on the wheel, the other holding a brass spyglass. Unlike the other pirates with their flamboyant attire, he dressed simply, but the quality of his dark coat and the gleam of the silver pistols at his belt spoke of success in his violent trade. Their eyes met briefly, and Eleanor quickly looked away. Something in his gaze made her blood run cold. Did he suspect? "You won't last a week." The ship's cook, a one-eyed man called Barton, appeared at her side. "Scrawny thing like you." "I'm stronger than I look," Eleanor replied, hefting the full bucket. Barton laughed. "We'll see. Storm's brewing. Captain can smell it. That's when we separate the men from the boys." He squinted at her face. "How old are you, anyway, lad?" 19, she lied, adding 2 years to her age. "And your name again?" "Eli." The alias felt strange on her tongue. "Eli Black." The ship lurched suddenly, and water sloshed over the bucket's rim, drenching her worn boots. The horizon had darkened, grey clouds gathering like spectral ships. "All hands!" The quartermaster's voice boomed across the deck. "Prepare to reef the mainsail." Eleanor froze, uncertain. She knew nothing of sailing. A rough hand grabbed her shoulder. "Move, boy." Silas shoved her toward the rigging, where men were already climbing. "Up you go." She stared at the swaying ropes, her heart pounding. "Problem, Mr. Black?" The voice behind her was deep, cultured, nothing like the rough speech of the other pirates. Captain Hawthorne stood there, his eyes narrowed against the wind. Up close, Eleanor could see the thin scar that traced his jawline, the flecks of grey in his dark beard. I've never climbed rigging before, Captain," she admitted, her voice carefully modulated. Something flickered in his expression. "Then stay below, help secure the cargo." He turned to Silas. "The boys knew. He'll be more hindrance than help aloft." "As you wish, Captain," Silas replied, though his expression suggested displeasure. Eleanor hurried below decks, feeling Hawthorne's gaze following her. In the dimness of the hold, she exhaled shakily. Something about the way he looked at her, as if he could see right through her disguise, terrified her more than the gathering storm. As she worked to secure barrels and crates, the ship began to pitch and roll. The timbers groaned under the assault of wind and wave. Above, men shouted, feet pounded on the deck. When the bell rang for the change of watch, Eleanor made her way to the cramped space she shared with 5 other crewmen. She climbed into her hammock fully clothed, as she had every night, and turned her face to the wall. "Mr. Black," the captain's voice nearly stopped her heart. She turned to find him standing in the narrow doorway. "My cabin." "Now." The other men exchanged glances. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain." Eleanor followed Captain Hawthorne through the narrow passageway, her heart hammering against the bindings, concealing her true form. The captain's quarters lay at the stern of the ship, separated from the chaos of the main deck by a solid oak door. Hawthorne pushed it open and gestured for her to enter. "After you, Mr. Black." The captain's cabin was larger than she expected, though still modest by land standards. A desk bolted to the floor dominated the space, covered with maps and navigational instruments. A narrow bed built into the wall was neatly made, and a small table with 2 chairs stood near a window that looked out over the churning sea. "Sit!" Hawthorne pointed to one of the chairs. Eleanor obeyed, perching on the edge, ready to flee though there was nowhere to go. The captain removed his coat and hung it carefully on a hook. Then he turned to study her with an unsettling intensity. "Would you care to explain yourself?" he asked quietly. "Sir?" She kept her voice low, her eyes fixed on the weathered planks of the floor. Hawthorne reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an ornate silver compass. He placed it on the table between them, its needle swinging gently with the motion of the ship. "This compass," he said, "was given to me by a navigator who claimed it always points to what you truly seek." His fingers traced the intricate engravings on its case. "I've found it more reliable than most. It doesn't lie or pretend to be something it's not." He looked up, his blue eyes piercing. "Unlike you." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "Captain, I don't. You're no boy." His voice was matter-of-fact. "Your hands are too fine despite the work you've done. You walk differently than a man. You avert your eyes when the men speak crudely." He leaned forward. "And no sailor I've ever met would be afraid to climb the rigging during a squall." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "Are you going to tell the crew?" A faint smile touched his lips. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're more valuable to me as a secret or as shark bait." He studied her face. "What's your real name?" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. If she was to die, she would do so with dignity. "Eleanor Blackwood." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Blackwood. Any relation to Merchant Blackwood of Port Royal?" "My father." Hawthorne nodded slowly. "The one they hanged for treason last month. I heard of it." He paused. "What I don't understand is why his daughter is disguised as a deckhand on my ship. What choice did I have?" The words burst from her. "They took everything, our home, our ships, our reputation. I had nowhere to go, no money, no protector." "So you chose a pirate vessel?" Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. "Most women would consider that jumping from the pot into the fire. Most women haven't watched their father swing from the gallows while the crowd cheered." Bitterness edged her voice. "I needed to disappear." Hawthorne studied her for a long moment. The ship rolled beneath them as the storm intensified. Finally, he nodded as if coming to a decision. "I should throw you overboard. Women aboard ship are bad luck." He tapped the compass thoughtfully. However, your arrival may be fortuitous." Eleanor frowned. "I don't understand. I have a proposition for you, Miss Blackwood." He sat back, regarding her with cool calculation. "One that could benefit us both." "What kind of proposition?" Suspicion colored her tone. "I need a wife." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Pardon? Not a real one?" He clarified, amusement briefly lighting his features. "In name only, for appearance's sake." "Why would a pirate need a wife?" Hawthorne rose and moved to the window, looking out at the storm-tossed waves. "In 3 days, we make port at Isla de los Secretos, the domain of Governor Santiago." "The pirate governor?" "The same. Santiago controls the richest smuggling routes in the Caribbean. An alliance with him would be advantageous." He turned back to her. "But Santiago is particular about whom he does business with. He fancies himself a gentleman, surrounds himself with the trappings of legitimacy." Understanding dawned, and married captains appear more respectable. "Ren done." "Precisely." Hawthorne returned to his seat. "You will pose as my wife during our stay on the island. In return, I will not reveal your true identity to my crew, who would likely not be as understanding as I am. And after, we renegotiate, or you're free to leave at the next proper port." His eyes narrowed. "Do we have an agreement?" Eleanor weighed her options, though she knew she had none. "What of my duties as a deckhand?" "You'll be moved to a small private cabin. You'll maintain your disguise to the crew for now." He stood, signaling the end of their discussion. "Well, Miss Blackwood." Eleanor rose, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "It seems I have little choice, Captain Hawthorne. Few of us do in this life." He opened the door. "Your new quarters are the storage room adjacent to Dr. Barrett's cabin. I'll have it prepared for you." As she stepped into the passageway, he added quietly, "One more thing, Miss Blackwood. Don't mistake this arrangement for mercy. If you betray me, the sea will have you." The door closed firmly behind her. Eleanor's new quarters were barely large enough for a narrow cot and a small sea chest, but after 3 nights of sleeping in a crowded hammock surrounded by snoring men, it felt like a palace. She ran her fingers along the rough wooden walls, pausing at a peculiar seam near the floor. Pressing against it revealed a small hidden compartment, just large enough to conceal her few personal items. "A ship keeps its secrets, much like its passengers," a voice said from the doorway. Eleanor turned to find a lean, scholarly-looking man watching her. His clothes were more refined than the other crewmen, though still practical for life at sea. "Dr. Barrett, I presume?" she asked, quickly adopting her Eli voice. He smiled slightly. "No need for pretense, Miss Blackwood. The captain has informed me of your situation." Eleanor sighed, releasing the tension in her shoulders. "Does anyone else know?" "Only the 3 of us. For now." He entered the small space, carrying a bundle of cloth. "Some clothes that might fit you better. Former passengers have occasionally left belongings behind." "Thank you." She accepted them gratefully. "The captain said I'm to maintain my disguise with the crew." Barrett nodded. "During the day, you're still Eli, the cabin boy. At night, the captain will be teaching you what you need to know to play your role as Mrs. Hawthorne." His eyes twinkled with amusement. "I suspect you'll find it an education." "I've had quite enough education lately," Eleanor muttered. "I imagine so." Barrett's expression softened. "Your father's fate was unfortunate. He was a good man, by most accounts. You knew him?" "Of him. His trading vessels were known for fair dealings, even with those of us who operate outside the law." Barrett moved toward the door. "Rest while you can. The captain expects you on deck at dawn as Eli. In the evening, you'll dine with him to begin your other training." After he left, Eleanor collapsed onto the cot. The dual identity was already exhausting to contemplate. She changed into the clothes Barrett had brought, still men's attire, but better fitting, and secured her binding with fresh strips of cloth. At dawn, she resumed her duties as Eli, scrubbing and hauling alongside the crew. Silas worked her harder than before, as if sensing something had changed. By midday, her muscles screamed in protest. "You'll grow accustomed to it." a friendly voice said as she leaned against the rail, catching her breath. A young sailor named Thomas offered her a ladle of water. First week's always the worst. Does the quartermaster dislike all new crew this much, or am I special? She asked, gratefully drinking. Thomas laughed. Silas distrusts anyone the captain takes interest in, and the captain definitely has his eye on you. Eleanor nearly choked on the water. What do you mean? Moving you to private quarters? Calling you to his cabin? Not typical treatment for a new hand. Thomas shrugged. Some say you remind him of someone. Others think you know something valuable. I'm nobody. Eleanor insisted. Then you're a nobody who'd better get back to work before Silas adds another watch to your duties, Thomas warned with a grin. The rest of the day passed in a blur of physical labor. As the sun began to set, Barrett appeared and quietly directed her to clean up before reporting to the captain's quarters. She washed quickly with the basin of fresh water provided a luxury on a ship and changed into the cleanest of her clothes. Her body ached, but she straightened her spine as she knocked on the captain's door. Enter, Hawthorne called. He sat at his desk, charting their course on a large map. Without looking up, he gestured to the table where a simple meal had been laid out. Sit, eat, you'll need your strength. Eleanor hesitated, then took a seat. The food was better than the crew's rations, fresh bread, salted meat, even an apple. She ate slowly, aware of his occasional glances. Finally, Hawthorne set aside his charts and joined her. Tell me what you know of navigation, he said without preamble. The question surprised her. My father taught me to read maps and use a sextant. I understand latitude and longitude and the basics of plotting a course. Show me. He pushed a chart toward her, along with navigational tools. For the next hour, he tested her knowledge, nodding with grudging approval at her answers. When they moved on to the politics of the Caribbean, she surprised him with her understanding of the delicate balance between the colonial powers. My father believed in knowing one's trading partners, she explained. He taught me about the governors, officials, and merchants we dealt with, their preferences, weaknesses, and ambitions. Valuable knowledge, Hawthorne admitted. You may be more useful than I anticipated. As they finished the lesson, Eleanor gathered her courage. May I ask a question, Captain? He raised an eyebrow. You may ask. I may not answer. Why did you really spare me? Surely finding a wife for your meeting with Santiago wouldn't be difficult in a port town. Hawthorne studied her for a long moment. Let's just say I recognized an opportunity when I saw one. A merchant's daughter with knowledge of trade routes and colonial politics is worth more than a port town strumpet who can only smile prettily. Is that all I am? An opportunity? In this world, Miss Blackwood, we are all either opportunities or obstacles to someone else. He stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Tomorrow evening, we continue with lessons on Santiago himself. Don't be late. As Eleanor returned to her cabin, she noticed Silas watching from the shadows, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. She quickened her pace, feeling suddenly vulnerable in the dark passageway. Inside her room, she discovered a small knife had been placed beneath her pillow, a silent acknowledgement from either Barrett or Hawthorne that her charade carried dangers beyond discovery. The weather changed with alarming swiftness. One moment, clear skies stretched across the horizon. The next, dark clouds gathered like a shroud over the Crimson Serpent. Eleanor felt the shift in the air, a heaviness that pressed against her skin as she hauled rope alongside Thomas and the other deckhands. All hands, Silas's voice boomed across the deck. Storm's coming! Secure the cargo and reef the sails! The crew burst into frantic activity. Eleanor followed Thomas's lead, helping to tie down barrels and crates that might otherwise become deadly projectiles in high seas. Captain Hawthorne emerged from his cabin, his expression grim as he studied the approaching tempest. Mr. Reed, set course due south. We'll try to skirt the worst of it. Eleanor glanced up to see Hawthorne unfold a tattered chart. Even from a distance, she recognized the ominous markings that surrounded a triangular area labeled the Devil's Triangle. Her father had warned his captains about that treacherous region where ships vanished without trace. The first fat raindrops pelted the deck as the wind rose to a howl. The ship pitched violently, sending several men sliding across the slick planks. Eleanor grabbed a rope to steady herself, the rough hemp cutting into her palms. "Eli," Thomas shouted over the gale, "help me with this line." They fought together to secure a flapping sail as waves crashed over the bow. The sea was no longer a road beneath them, but a hungry beast intent on devouring the ship whole. A tremendous wave lifted the Crimson Serpent high before dropping her with sickening speed. Eleanor lost her footing, tumbling toward the rail. Only Thomas's quick grab at her shirt saved her from being swept overboard. "I've got you," he yelled, pulling her back. But as they regained their balance, a loose boom swung wildly across the deck. Eleanor saw it before Thomas did a massive wooden arm, hurtling toward them with deadly force. "Look out!" She shoved Thomas hard, sending him sprawling safely across the deck as the boom whipped past. The momentum carried her dangerously close to the rail. As the ship lurched again, Eleanor felt herself lifted off her feet, the dark sea rising to meet her. A strong hand seized her collar, yanking her back onto the deck. Captain Hawthorne stood over her, rain streaming down his face, his eyes fierce in the storm's grey light. "Below deck," he ordered, pulling her to her feet. "Now." "But the others, that's an order." She stumbled toward the hatch, casting one last glance at the chaos behind her. Thomas gave her a grateful nod as he helped secure another line. Below, Dr. Barrett was preparing for casualties, laying out instruments and bandages. "Ah, there you are," he said when he saw Eleanor. "Give me a hand with these supplies." For hours, they worked together, treating injuries as the storm raged, gashes, sprains, one broken arm. The ship creaked and groaned around them, timbers straining against the sea's fury. When the hatch opened again, Hawthorne descended, carrying a young sailor whose head was bleeding profusely. "Martin fell from the rigging," he explained tersely, laying the boy on Barrett's table. Eleanor immediately pressed a clean cloth to the wound, while Barrett examined the sailor's pupils. "The skull seems intact," the doctor murmured, "but he'll need stitches." As Barrett worked, Hawthorne pulled Eleanor aside. "You saved Thomas today." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "He would have done the same for me, perhaps." His eyes studied her face. "But it was reckless. You nearly went overboard. I couldn't just watch him die." "No. And what of your own life?" His voice lowered. "Your disguise slipped today. Several men noticed your reaction." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "You screamed." His mouth twisted. "Not like a sailor or a cabin boy, but like a woman. Did anyone else recognize?" "Silas suspects something. He doesn't know what yet, but he's watching you." Hawthorne ran a hand through his wet hair. "You've complicated matters." "I apologize for not drowning silently," she retorted. Unexpectedly, a smile tugged at his lips. "You have spirit, I'll grant you that." The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "But spirit won't save you if the crew discovers who you really are." Eleanor swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" "We change course." He glanced at Barrett, who was finishing with the injured sailor. "The storm has pushed us off our original heading. We'll need to stop for repairs before we reach Santiago's island." "Where?" "A small cove, I know, uninhabited, but sheltered." He lowered his voice. "We'll use the time to further prepare you for your role." As the storm gradually subsided, Eleanor returned to her cabin, exhausted. She found a note slipped beneath her door, written in a precise hand. "The captain requests your presence when the bell strikes midnight. Bring the charts from your lessons." When she arrived at his cabin, Hawthorne was studying the tattered map she had noticed earlier. His face was shadowed with fatigue and something else, a darkness that hadn't been there before. "Do you know why I became a pirate, Miss Blackwood?" he asked without looking up. "For wealth, I presume. Isn't that why most men turn to piracy?" "Some, perhaps." He traced the outline of a Royal Navy vessel drawn on the chart. "I had another reason entirely." "What was that?" His eyes, when they met hers, burned with an intensity that made her step back. Vengeance. Isla de los Secretos rose from the azure waters like a sleeping giant, its lush green peaks shrouded in wispy clouds. The Crimson Serpent, patched but still proud after the storm, approached the hidden harbor on the island's eastern side. Eleanor stood at the rail, no longer disguised as Eli. The transformation had begun that morning when Dr. Barrett delivered a trunk to her cabin containing women's clothing, simple but finely made gowns, appropriate undergarments, and even a pair of delicate slippers. "Your husband awaits," Barrett had said with a wink, referring to Hawthorne. Now, dressed in a deep blue gown that complemented her eyes, Eleanor felt strangely vulnerable. The heavy skirts restricted her movement after days in men's breeches, and the bodice, though modest by fashionable standards, revealed more of her figure than she had shown since boarding the ship. Most of the crew had reacted with stunned silence when Hawthorne introduced her as his wife, explaining that she had been disguised for her protection during their journey through dangerous waters. If any doubted this tale, none dared question the captain openly, though Silas's scowl spoke volumes. Hawthorne appeared beside her, his usual weathered sailing clothes replaced by an elegant coat of midnight blue with silver buttons. His dark hair was neatly tied back, and his beard trimmed to fashionable precision. "You clean up well, Captain," Eleanor remarked, surprised by his transformation. "As do you, Mrs. Hawthorne." He offered a stiff bow, though something is missing. From his pocket, he withdrew a black pearl necklace, the lustrous orbs gleaming with subtle iridescence in the sunlight. "A gift for my bride," he said loudly enough for nearby crew to hear. More quietly, he added, "Santiago appreciates displays of wealth. This will help convince him of our legitimacy." Eleanor turned so he could fasten the necklace around her throat. The weight of it felt like a collar. "These belong to your previous wife, I presume," she whispered with false sweetness, playing her role. His fingers paused against her neck. "I've never been married, Miss Blackwood. The pearls were payment for a job." "A job? The kind that leaves widows?" His voice was cold as he completed the clasp. The harbor opened before them, revealing an impressive settlement. Unlike the ramshackle pirate havens Eleanor had heard described, Isla de los Secretos boasted solid stone buildings, orderly streets, and what appeared to be a small fortress overlooking the bay. "Santiago styles himself a governor," Hawthorne explained. "He maintains the illusion of civilization here." "An illusion? Make no mistake, every soul on this island is a thief, murderer, or worse. They simply do their killing with better manners." A welcoming party awaited them at the dock, uniformed men who might have been mistaken for a legitimate governor's guard, if not for the assortment of scars and missing appendages among them. As they disembarked, Eleanor took Hawthorne's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Nervous, husband?" she murmured. "Cautious," he corrected. "Santiago's allegiances shift with the tide. Remember what I told you, speak little, observe much, and stay close to me at all times." A tall, imposing man with silver-streaked black hair and a neatly trimmed goatee approached, flanked by guards. His clothing was of the finest Spanish cut, and jeweled rings adorned his fingers. "Captain Hawthorne." His accent was Castilian, his voice smooth as aged rum. "Welcome back to my humble island." "Governor Santiago." Hawthorne bowed slightly. "May I present my wife, Eleanor?" Santiago's dark eyes assessed her with unconcealed interest. "I was unaware you had married, Captain. A recent development, I presume." "Recent enough," Hawthorne replied evenly. "And fortunate for us all." Santiago took Eleanor's hand, brushing his lips across her knuckles. "Any celebration that brings beauty to our shores is welcome." A rustle of silk announced another arrival. A young woman with Santiago's coloring but softer features appeared at his side, her crimson gown highlighting her olive complexion. "My daughter, Isabella," Santiago introduced her. "She insisted on greeting our distinguished guests personally." Isabella's curtsy was perfect, her smile practiced. But when her eyes met Hawthorne's, Eleanor saw a flash of something history, perhaps, or secrets shared. "Captain Hawthorne," Isabella's voice was musical. "How pleasing to see you again, and with a wife, no less." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, appraising. "How fortunate you are to have captured such a renowned privateer." "I consider myself the fortunate one," Eleanor replied, carefully watching the interplay between them. Santiago clapped his hands. "Come, a feast awaits at the governor's mansion. We have much to discuss, Captain, new trade routes, recent naval patrols, and—" his voice lowered conspiratorially, a most lucrative opportunity that may interest you. As they followed Santiago up the winding path to the mansion, Isabella fell into step beside Eleanor. "Black pearls," she commented, eyeing Eleanor's necklace. "Very rare, very valuable. A gift from my husband," Eleanor replied. Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "James has always had excellent taste. I hope you appreciate how selective he is in his choices." The familiar use of Hawthorne's first name confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Before she could respond, Isabella continued, her voice a silken whisper. "Tell me, Mrs. Hawthorne, does your husband still call out in his sleep? The nightmares used to trouble him so." Candlelight danced across polished marble as musicians played a stately pavane. Governor Santiago's grand ball had drawn pirates and smugglers from across the Caribbean, all dressed in finery that would not have looked out of place in a European court. The veneer of civilization was thin but meticulously maintained. Eleanor stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of wine untouched in her hand. The gown Santiago had insisted on providing, emerald silk with gold embroidery, made her feel like an exotic bird on display. Beneath its voluminous skirts, she had strapped a silver dagger to her thigh, a precaution that gave her more comfort than the armed guards stationed throughout the mansion. "You look uncomfortable, Mrs. Hawthorne." Isabella materialized beside her, resplendent in crimson and black. "Is the gown not to your liking?" "It's beautiful," Eleanor replied carefully. "I'm simply unaccustomed to such grand affairs. Indeed, I would have thought a merchant's daughter, familiar with society gatherings." Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade. "Or perhaps your husband hasn't shared the full truth of your background." Eleanor's pulse quickened. How much did this woman know? "My father's business was successful, but modest. Nothing like this opulence." "How charming." Isabella's gaze drifted to where Hawthorne stood deep in conversation with Santiago and several other captains. James always did have a weakness for authenticity. So refreshing after years of court intrigues. Before Eleanor could respond, the music changed to a more lively tune, and Isabella's expression brightened with calculated mischief. "Ah, the dance begins. You must join, of course. As the newest wife among us, tradition demands you and your husband lead." Eleanor searched desperately for an excuse. "I'm afraid Nonsense." Isabella took her wineglass and handed it to a passing servant. "James is an excellent dancer, one of his many talents." She beckoned to Hawthorne, who looked up with a momentary flash of annoyance before schooling his features and approaching. "Your wife requires your attention, Captain," Isabella purred. "The dance is beginning." Hawthorne bowed slightly. "If you'll excuse us, my lady." He offered his arm to Eleanor, leading her toward the center of the room where couples were gathering. "I don't know this dance," Eleanor whispered urgently. "Follow my lead," he murmured, placing one hand at her waist. "It's similar to a minuet. Small steps, back straight." His eyes held hers. "Trust me." Surprisingly, she did. As the music swelled, Hawthorne guided her through the unfamiliar patterns with unexpected grace. His hand was warm against hers, his movements confident and precise. "You dance well for a pirate," she observed quietly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wasn't always a pirate." "What were you before?" "A different man entirely." The music shifted, bringing them closer together. "Santiago is planning something. He's meeting privately with certain captains after the ball." "Not you?" "Apparently not." His expression darkened. "Isabella has been asking questions about you. She knows I'm not really your wife." "Possibly. She's always been perceptive." He executed a turn that kept their conversation private from nearby dancers. "And dangerous when she feels slighted. Were you and she once, briefly, years ago?" His jaw tightened. "A mistake." The dance brought them apart and then together again. As they circled one another, Eleanor noticed a tall, bronze-skinned captain watching her with undisguised interest. "You've caught Rafael Vega's eye," Hawthorne observed, his voice cooling. "The Spaniard with the gold earring. Should I be concerned? Vega collects beautiful things, women included." Hawthorne's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Stay away from him." As the dance ended, Vega approached, bowing with continental flourish. Captain Hawthorne, you must introduce me to your lovely wife." Hawthorne's posture stiffened. "Captain Raphael Vega, may I present Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne?" Enchanted, Vega took her hand, his lips lingering longer than propriety dictated. "Perhaps the lady would honor me with the next dance." Before Hawthorne could object, Governor Santiago appeared at their side. "Ah, Captain Vega, just the man I wished to see." He turned to Hawthorne. "You won't mind if I borrow both gentlemen for a moment? Business matters. Lady Isabella will keep your charming wife company." It wasn't a request. With obvious reluctance, Hawthorne followed Santiago and Vega toward a side chamber, casting a warning glance back at Eleanor. Isabella slipped her arm through Eleanor's, leading her toward the terrace doors. "Let the men discuss their tedious affairs. The gardens are lovely in the moonlight." The night air was heavy with the scent of exotic flowers as they strolled among carefully tended paths. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting pools of golden light. "James seems quite protective of you," Isabella observed. "Unusual for him, is it?" Eleanor kept her tone neutral. "Oh, yes. In my experience, he guards his heart more carefully than his ship." Isabella stopped beside a ornamental pond. "Which makes me wonder what's different about you. Perhaps marriage has changed him." Isabella laughed, the sound like shattering glass. "Men like James don't change, my dear. They simply find new masks to wear." She leaned closer. "Did he tell you about the Royal Navy officer he's hunting, the one whose blood he's sworn to spill?" Eleanor's confusion must have shown on her face, for Isabella smiled with satisfaction. "I thought not." She gestured toward the mansion. "There's so much you don't know about the man you call husband. So many secrets." From inside came the unmistakable sound of raised voices, followed by the ring of steel against steel. "Ah," Isabella sighed. "It seems the business discussion has taken an unexpected turn." Eleanor gathered her skirts and rushed back toward the ballroom, her heart pounding beneath the emerald silk. Eleanor rushed through the terrace doors to find the ballroom in chaos. Guests pressed against the walls as Hawthorne and Vega circled each other in the center, swords drawn. Blood stained Vega's ruffled sleeve, while Hawthorne's face bore a fresh cut above his right eye. "Gentlemen," Santiago's voice thundered across the room, "this is a civilized gathering." Neither man lowered his weapon. "He insulted my wife," Hawthorne growled, never taking his eyes off Vega. The Spaniard's smile was cruel. "I merely suggested that perhaps the lady deserved better than a common pirate playing at nobility." He lunged suddenly, his blade slicing air as Hawthorne sidestepped. "Enough!" Santiago stepped between them, seemingly unconcerned by the naked steel. "Captain Vega, you will apologize for any offense. Captain Hawthorne, you will accept or take this matter elsewhere. I will not have blood on my marble floors." Vega lowered his sword with obvious reluctance. "My apologies, Captain." I spoke hastily. His eyes found Eleanor in the crowd. "Though I stand by my admiration for your wife's beauty." Hawthorne sheathed his blade, his face hard as stone. "Accepted, this time." The tension in the room gradually dissolved as servants appeared with fresh wine. Musicians resumed playing, though the melody seemed forced. Eleanor made her way to Hawthorne's side, taking his arm. "You're bleeding," she murmured, touching a handkerchief to his brow. "It's nothing." He guided her firmly toward a quiet alcove, away from curious eyes. "What did Isabella tell you in the garden?" "She mentioned a Royal Navy officer you're hunting." Eleanor studied his face. "Someone whose blood you've sworn to spill." Hawthorne's expression darkened. "Isabella talks too much. Is it true?" Before he could answer, a servant approached with a silver tray bearing a folded piece of parchment. "For Mrs. Hawthorne," the man said, bowing. Eleanor opened it to find a message in elegant script. "The North Tower, midnight. Information about your father's betrayer." She quickly concealed the note, but not before Hawthorne's keen eyes noticed. "What is it?" he demanded. "Nothing important." The lie felt awkward on her tongue. "Just Lady Isabella suggesting we meet tomorrow for tea." His skepticism was evident, but he didn't press the issue as Santiago approached, smiling broadly as if the earlier violence had never occurred. "Captain Hawthorne, I hope our little disruption hasn't soured your evening." He bowed to Eleanor. "And you, My dear lady, are a vision. That gown suits you perfectly. You're too kind, Governor, Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. Not at all. Santiago gestured to a servant who presented a small wooden box, a token of my esteem for our new friendship. Inside lay an intricately folded piece of parchment, a coded message, Eleanor realized, recognizing the pattern from documents she'd seen in her father's study. Intercepted from a Royal Navy vessel last week, Santiago explained quietly. Perhaps of interest to you, Captain, given your ongoing concerns. Hawthorne's face revealed nothing as he tucked the box into his coat. Your generosity is appreciated. We shall speak more tomorrow, after you've had time to study it. Santiago bowed again before moving on to other guests. As the evening wore on, Eleanor found herself increasingly distracted by the mysterious note. Who knew about her father's betrayal, and why arrange a secret meeting? When the grandfather clock struck 11, she touched Hawthorne's arm. I find myself fatigued after the excitement. Perhaps we might retire. His eyes searched hers. Of course, wife. The emphasis on the last word reminded her of their charade. Santiago provided a luxurious guest suite in the east wing, a bedchamber with an adjoining sitting room and private bath. As soon as the door closed behind them, Hawthorne dropped the pretense of marital affection. What aren't you telling me? He demanded, removing his coat. I might ask you the same. Eleanor moved to the window, calculating the route to the North Tower. Why did you become so enraged with Vega? He's hardly the first man to look at me appreciatively. Vega doesn't look, he hunts. Hawthorne poured himself a measure of brandy from a crystal decanter. And he's Santiago's creature. Nothing he does is without purpose, including provoking you, especially that. He drank deeply. Santiago tests everyone who enters his domain, watching how they react to insult, to temptation, to threat. It's how he measures their worth. And how did you measure up this evening? A bitter smile crossed his face. Poorly, I suspect. A man in control doesn't draw his sword over mere words. Eleanor turned from the window. Why are you really here, Captain? It's not just for an alliance with Santiago, is it? No. He set down his glass and approached her, close enough that she could smell the brandy on his breath. It's about justice, vengeance, call it what you will. For what? His eyes held hers. For a good man who was betrayed and hanged while the true traitors prospered. My father, she whispered. He nodded once. Your father, my mentor. The clock in the sitting room chimed the 3/4 hour. Eleanor made a swift decision. I need air, she said. I'll walk in the garden. At this hour, alone. Suspicion colored his voice. Would you deny your wife a moment's solitude after such an eventful evening? She raised an eyebrow, challenging him. They stared at each other for a long moment before he stepped aside. Take this. He pressed a small pistol into her hand. And be back within the hour, or I'll come looking for you. The weight of the weapon was reassuring as Eleanor slipped through shadowed corridors toward the North Tower. Whatever awaited her there, she would face it armed with both steel and truth. The North Tower loomed against the star-strewn sky, its ancient stones silvered by moonlight. Eleanor climbed the narrow spiral staircase, one hand lifting her skirts, the other gripping Hawthorne's pistol. At the top landing, a heavy wooden door stood ajar, flickering candlelight spilling through the gap. She hesitated, then pushed it open. The circular chamber was sparsely furnished, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with leather-bound books. Maps covered one wall, marked with shipping routes and naval patrol patterns. And there, propped on an easel, was a faded portrait she recognized instantly. Her father, younger than she remembered him, standing beside a dark-haired youth who could only be James Hawthorne. He kept his promise to me, a voice said from the shadows. Eleanor whirled, raising the pistol. Dr. Barrett stepped into the light, hands raised placatingly. Peace, Miss Blackwood. I'm alone. You? She lowered the weapon slightly. You sent the note? I did. He gestured to the portrait. Your father saved my life once, when I was ship's surgeon on a merchant vessel attacked by pirates. He showed mercy when others would have slit my throat. What do you know of his betrayal? Barrett moved to the table, where papers were spread in neat rows. I've spent years gathering information. Thomas Blackwood was no traitor, he was silenced. Why? Because he discovered a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of the Admiralty. Barrett indicated the documents. Certain naval officers have been selling information to the Spanish patrol routes, cargo manifests, colony defenses. Your father found evidence. Eleanor's mind raced. But why frame him for treason? A perfect scapegoat, respected merchant with access to sensitive information. When suspicions arose about leaked intelligence, they planted false evidence in his ledgers. Barrett's voice hardened. Admiral Reginald Blackwood orchestrated it all. My uncle? Eleanor sank into a chair, stunned. My father's own brother betrayed him? For power, for wealth. Barrett handed her a sealed letter. Your father wrote this before his execution. It was meant for Hawthorne, but I intercepted it. With trembling fingers, Eleanor broke the seal. Her father's familiar handwriting brought tears to her eyes. James, if you are reading this, I am gone. Trust no one in the Admiralty. The corruption runs deep. My brother leads them, driven by jealousy that has festered since childhood. Protect my daughter if you can. The evidence you need is hidden where we first plotted our course to a better world. Thomas, Hawthorne was my father's apprentice, Eleanor murmured, pieces falling into place. More than that, he was like a son to Thomas. Barrett tapped the portrait. Hawthorne was a naval officer once, until he discovered the truth about your father's arrest. He turned pirate to continue the fight against those who betrayed Thomas. Eleanor studied the portrait, her father in his prime, hand resting on young Hawthorne's shoulder. Their expressions spoke of mutual respect, of shared purpose. Does Hawthorne know you have this information? She asked. Some, not all. I've been careful. Barrett gathered the papers. Santiago has his own agenda. He plays all sides, Spanish, English, French, selling information to the highest bidder. And Isabella? Santiago's greatest weapon. She uses beauty and charm to extract secrets from powerful men. Barrett's expression darkened. She nearly destroyed Hawthorne once. The tower bell tolled midnight, the sound reverberating through the stone walls. We should go, Barrett said, separately, to avoid suspicion. Keep the letter, it belongs to you now. Eleanor tucked the precious document into her bodice. Why are you telling me all this? Why not Hawthorne directly? Barrett's smile was sad. Because Thomas Blackwood once showed me that honor doesn't depend on which flag you sail under. I owe him a debt I can never repay. He moved to the door, and because Hawthorne needs someone he can trust, though he'd never admit it. After Barrett departed, Eleanor lingered, studying the portrait. The young Hawthorne looked so different, hope and idealism in his eyes, instead of the hardened cynicism she knew now. She was about to leave when the door swung open. Isabella stood in the threshold, a knowing smile on her lips. My, she purred. Secret midnight meetings already. Your marriage must be even less genuine than I suspected. Eleanor straightened, keeping her face composed. Lady Isabella, I was just admiring the view from the tower. Indeed. And what else did you admire while here? Isabella glided into the room, her gaze falling on the portrait. Ah, I see. The past has a way of finding us, doesn't it? What do you want, Isabella? Direct. I like that. She circled Eleanor like a predator. I want what I've always wanted to understand James Hawthorne, to know why he's returned to Santiago's orbit after swearing never to. Perhaps you should ask him yourself. Oh, I have, many times, in many ways. Isabella trailed her fingers across the portrait. He never gives a straight answer. But now, I think I understand. Her eyes flicked to the letter visible in Eleanor's bodice. He's still fighting old battles, still trying to avenge his beloved mentor. Eleanor said nothing. Your father was a good man, by all accounts. Isabella's voice softened unexpectedly. Unlike mine. Unlike most men who wield power in this world. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm curious whether you're here by choice or necessity. Isabella moved toward the door. And because you should know that your husband is searching for you. Rather frantically, I might add. A smile played on her lips. He seems genuinely concerned. How unexpected. As Isabella disappeared down the stairway, Eleanor heard rapid footsteps ascending. Moments later, Hawthorne burst into the chamber, relief and anger warring on his face. What the devil are you doing here? He demanded. Eleanor gestured to the portrait, finding ghosts, it seems, and perhaps some truth at last. The Crimson Serpent's deck seethed with discontent. Men gathered in small groups, voices low and faces dark, as they watched Eleanor board the ship behind Hawthorne. Their hasty departure from Santiago's island had raised questions Silas Reed was all too eager to inflame. The captain brings a woman aboard and calls her wife one day, has us sail through a storm the next, then flees a safe harbor without explanation. The quartermaster's voice carried across the deck. Makes a man wonder what game we're playing. Eleanor kept her head high as she walked past the muttering crew. 3 days at sea had done little to quell the growing unrest. Hawthorne had barely spoken to her since their confrontation in the tower, issuing terse instructions but offering no explanations. Only Barrett's occasional sympathetic glance assured her she wasn't entirely alone. "Captain," Silas called out, his tone just shy of insubordination, "the men are asking to know our heading." Hawthorne turned, his face impassive. "Our heading is north-northwest. Beyond that, the men need know nothing more." "With respect," Silas persisted, "the ship's articles give the crew right to vote on." "I'm familiar with the articles, Mr. Reed." Hawthorne's voice was dangerously soft. "Perhaps you'd care to read them aloud? Particularly the section on the captain's authority during times of war?" A weathered leather-bound book lay chained to a post near the helm. The ship's articles, the code by which all aboard lived and died. Silas hesitated, then stepped forward to open it. "Article 7, he read reluctantly. "In times of pursuit or engagement with enemy vessels, the captain's command shall be absolute, superseding all voting rights until such danger has passed." "And are we pursuing an enemy vessel, Captain?" asked a burly sailor named Crow. "We are." Hawthorne surveyed the gathered men. "A Royal Navy frigate carrying an officer who possesses information vital to our continued freedom." Murmurs rippled through the crew. "What officer?" Silas demanded. "Captain Reginald Frost." Hawthorne's eyes found Eleanor's, a man with much to answer for. Recognition flickered across some faces. Frost's reputation for hunting pirates was well known. The tension shifted subtly. A common enemy often united divided ranks. "And the woman," Silas pointed at Eleanor. "What's her place in this hunt?" "Mrs. Hawthorne has personal cause to see Frost brought to justice," Hawthorne replied evenly. "Her father was executed on false testimony," Frost provided. A hush fell over the deck. Pirates might be outlaws, but they held their own rough code of honor. False testimony leading to execution was a crime even they despised. "Is this true, Mum?" Crow asked Eleanor directly. She stepped forward, heart pounding but voice steady. "My father was Thomas Blackwood, a merchant who discovered corruption within the Admiralty. Captain Frost helped frame him for treason. I watched him hang for crimes he never committed." The silence deepened. Many had known or traded with Blackwood, a merchant with a reputation for fair dealing, even with those who operated outside the law. "That still don't explain why you came aboard disguised as a boy," Silas pressed. "Where else could I go?" Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "The Navy seized our property. My father's associates shunned me. The streets of Port Royal offer few options for a woman alone." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "She's got more courage than most, taking a chance on a pirate vessel." "Courage or desperation," Silas countered. "Either way, a woman aboard ship brings bad luck. Always has." "Superstition," Barrett interjected, joining the conversation. "I've seen no evidence of bad luck beyond what we bring upon ourselves." "The storm," Silas began, "was seasonal and predictable," Barrett finished. "Would you blame her for the tides as well?" Laughter rippled through some of the crew, breaking the tension. Silas's face darkened. "The articles are clear," he insisted. "No women aboard except by vote of the crew." He turned to the men. "I call for a vote. All those in favor of putting her ashore at the next port." Hands began to rise, fewer than Silas clearly expected, but enough to cause concern. "Before you vote," Eleanor said clearly, "know that I can read charts better than most navigators, speak 3 languages useful in these waters, and know more about naval patrol patterns than anyone save the captain himself." She straightened her spine. "I'm not asking for special treatment. Put me to work anywhere, rigging, galley, guns. Judge me by what I can contribute, not what I am. Crow lowered his hand, followed by several others. Seems fair to give her a chance. The articles, Silas began again, also state that any skilled person may petition to join the crew, regardless of background, Hawthorne interrupted. Article 3. Let her prove herself, called a voice from the back. Silas looked around, realizing he was losing support. Fine. A week's trial. But she gets no special quarters, no captain's protection. She works and lives as one of us. His eyes gleamed with malice, complete with punishment when she fails. Agreed, Eleanor said before Hawthorne could object. Then it's settled. Hawthorne's voice was tight with controlled anger. Mr. Reed, you'll assign Mrs. Hawthorne appropriate duties. Doctor. Barrett will arrange suitable sleeping arrangements. He fixed Silas with a hard stare. And I'll personally deal with anyone who offers her insult or injury. As the crew dispersed, Hawthorne pulled Eleanor aside, his voice low and furious. What are you thinking? You've put yourself in danger with this stunt. I was already in danger, she replied. At least now it's on my terms. These men aren't gentlemen playing at piracy. They're killers and thieves. So I've been told. Repeatedly. She met his gaze steadily. Yet here I stand. Something like admiration flickered in his eyes before he masked it with scowl. Barrett, he called. A word. As Hawthorne and the doctor conferred quietly, Eleanor felt the weight of the crew's scrutiny. She had won a reprieve, not acceptance. Proving her worth would be the greater challenge. Silas approached, a calculating smile on his weather-beaten face. Report to the gun deck at the next bell, Mrs. Hawthorne. Let's see how those fine merchants' hands handle a cannon. Eleanor's shoulders ached as she helped haul the heavy cannon into position. 5 days of working, the gun deck had toughened her hands with calluses and strengthened muscles she hadn't known existed. She wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a smudge of gunpowder across her forehead. You're learning quickly, Thomas commented, showing her how to secure the massive weapon after their practice drill. Silas expected you to quit by now. Then he doesn't know me very well, Eleanor replied, tightening the ropes with a grunt. The crew's attitude had gradually shifted from open hostility to grudging acceptance. Her willingness to tackle the dirtiest jobs without complaint had earned their respect, if not their friendship. All except Silas, whose resentment seemed to grow with each passing day. Ship ahoy! The lookout's cry echoed from above. 2 points off starboard bow. The deck erupted into activity. Eleanor followed Thomas up the ladder to see the distant silhouette of a vessel on the horizon. Hawthorne stood at the helm, spyglass extended. His expression was unreadable as he lowered the glass and turned to Barrett, who had unfurled a map marked with small red crosses indicating locations of Royal Navy attacks. It's her, Hawthorne confirmed. The Intrepid, Captain Frost's frigate. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crew. For days, they had been tracking the naval vessel based on intelligence from Santiago's documents. Gun crews to stations, Hawthorne ordered. Mr. Reed, prepare the men for engagement. Eleanor moved to return below, but Hawthorne called her name. A word, Miss Blackwood. In the privacy of his cabin, he spread the map across his desk. This is our quarry, 40 guns, 300 men, more than a match for us in a straight fight. Then why pursue her? Because Frost has information we need: names of conspirators, documented evidence of the plot against your father. Hawthorne indicated a small island on the chart. He's heading for Kingston, but will pass close to Isla de Huesos, the Isle of Bones. The waters there are treacherous, forcing ships to slow and navigate carefully. You mean to attack there, Eleanor realized, when they're vulnerable. Precisely. His eyes met hers. This isn't just about vengeance anymore. Frost's documents could clear your father's name. Eleanor studied the map, noting the complex system of reefs surrounding the island. These waters are dangerous for us as well, which is why I need your help. He pointed to a narrow channel. Your father once mentioned you had a gift for navigation, for memorizing coastal features. He taught me, she confirmed. We would stand on the quarterdeck together, identifying landmarks, reading currents. Then you understand what I'm asking. Guide us through these waters so we can position for attack. Before she could respond, Barrett entered without knocking. Captain, Silas is questioning your orders publicly. The men are listening. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Where? Main deck. They arrived to find Silas addressing a gathered crowd. Madness to attack a Navy frigate of that size. And for what? Personal vengeance. Stand down, Mr. Reed. Hawthorne's voice cut through the murmurs. Silas turned, defiance written across his features. The men deserve to know what they're dying for, Captain. A merchant's honor? A woman's revenge? They're fighting for justice, Eleanor stepped forward, and for the considerable bounty in Frost's strongbox. The Royal Navy pays its senior officers handsomely for Caribbean duty. This captured the crew's attention. Pirates might fight for many reasons, but profit remained a powerful motivator. The woman speaks of things she cannot know, Silas scoffed. I know that Frost carries the quarterly pay for 3 garrisons, Eleanor countered. Nearly £20,000 sterling if the schedule holds. Murmurs of interest rippled through the crew. And how would you know such details? Silas demanded. My father's shipping company transported official payrolls under contract. She smiled thinly. The schedules change little from year to year. Hawthorne seized the moment. We have the weather gauge and knowledge of waters. Frost must navigate cautiously. A successful attack means both gold in your pockets and a blow against the Navy that hunts us all. The crew's mood shifted, greed and the prospect of action overcoming caution. I still say it's too risky, Silas insisted, though with less conviction. Your concern is noted, Mr. Reed. Hawthorne's tone hardened. Now return to your duties or face charges of inciting mutiny. As Silas slunk away, Hawthorne turned to Eleanor. It seems you've found another way to prove your value. For 3 days, they shadowed the Intrepid, maintaining distance to avoid detection while plotting its course. Eleanor worked closely with Hawthorne, studying the maps, calculating tides and currents around Isla de Huesos. In the evenings, Barrett taught her to handle pistol and sword. The captain insists, he explained when she questioned the necessity, says if you're to be part of this fight, you should be able to defend yourself. On the 4th night, with the Intrepid expected to reach the island by morning, Hawthorne summoned Eleanor to his cabin. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face as he pored over charts and naval documents. Tomorrow we engage, he said without preamble. Are you prepared to face the man who condemned my father? Yes, Hawthorne studied her. This won't bring Thomas back. I know. She traced the outline of the island on the map, but it might bring him justice. Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Why did you become a pirate? She finally asked. You could have fought them from within the Navy. I tried. Bitterness tinged his voice, presented evidence to my superiors. 3 days later, I was facing court-martial on fabricated charges. He gave a humorless laugh. Your father once told me that sometimes a man must become the villain to fight true evil. And have you become the villain? His eyes met hers. What do you think? Before she could answer, the ship's bell rang urgently, followed by shouts from the deck. They rushed outside to find the crew pointing at an approaching vessel, sleek, fast, and flying the Crimson Serpent's own colors. It's the pinnace, Barrett explained, the one we left with Santiago's men. As the smaller craft drew alongside, a single figure climbed aboard, dark-haired and grim-faced. Isabella, Hawthorne breathed in surprise. The governor's daughter tossed back her cloak, revealing a sealed document. Captain Frost knows you're coming, she announced without preamble. He set a trap at Isla de Huesos. 3 ships, not one, await you there. Dawn painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold as the Crimson Serpent approached Isla de Huesos. The jagged rocks surrounding the island resembled skeletal fingers, reaching from the depths, a fitting backdrop for the battle to come. Despite Isabella's warning, Hawthorne had not abandoned the pursuit. Instead, he'd altered their approach, using the island's eastern reef as cover while they assessed the enemy's position. 3 ships, he confirmed grimly, lowering his spyglass. The Intrepid, as expected, plus 2 smaller vessels, a sloop and a cutter. Eleanor stood beside him at the rail, her hair bound tightly back, dressed in men's clothing for ease of movement. Barrett had provided her with a pistol and cutlass, both of which hung uncomfortably at her belt. They're positioned to block the main channel, she observed, but there's a smaller passage here. She pointed to a narrow gap between 2 rock formations. My father used it once to evade privateers. It's shallow, but the serpent might clear it with the tide. Hawthorne studied the passage. You're certain? Reasonably so. Reasonably, he echoed with a wry smile. Not the most reassuring word before a battle. Isabella joined them, her usual elegant attire replaced by practical sailing clothes. My father will be furious when he discovers I've helped you. Why did you? Eleanor asked directly. Isabella's dark eyes revealed nothing. Santiago makes alliances with whoever offers the greatest advantage. Currently, that's the Royal Navy. She shrugged. I prefer to make my own choices. And you chose to warn us, Hawthorne noted. Why? Perhaps I don't wish to see you dead just yet, James. Her smile was enigmatic, or perhaps I have my own reasons to see Frost humbled. Further discussion was interrupted by Barrett's arrival. The men are ready, Captain. Guns loaded, boarding parties assembled. Hawthorne nodded. Good. Miss Blackwood will guide us through the Eastern Passage. Once we clear it, we'll have the element of surprise, at least briefly. And the plan after that? Barrett asked. Hit hard and fast, disable the Intrepid's rudder, then board her before the other vessels can provide support. Hawthorne turned to Isabella. You'll remain below with Dr. Barrett. I most certainly will not, she replied coolly. I didn't risk my father's wrath to cower in your hold. Before Hawthorne could argue, Eleanor intervened. She can assist Barrett with the wounded. We'll need every able hand if this goes poorly. The two women exchanged measured looks, a moment of grudging understanding passing between them. Very well, Hawthorne conceded. Take the helm, Miss Blackwood. Show us this passage of yours. The narrow channel proved even more treacherous than Eleanor remembered. Twice they came perilously close to the rocks, the ship's timbers groaning in protest as she guided them through. But her father's lessons held true, and they emerged into open water directly behind the Intrepid. Gun crews ready, Hawthorne shouted. Aim for her rudder and stern quarters. The Crimson Serpent's cannons roared to life, sending iron balls crashing into the Intrepid's vulnerable stern. The naval vessel, caught completely by surprise, had no time to bring her own guns to bear before a second devastating volley splintered her rudder. She's crippled, Silas called out, a fierce grin splitting his face. The others are turning to engage. Boarding parties prepare, Hawthorne ordered, grappling hooks ready. As they closed with the wounded frigate, Eleanor could see confusion on her decks. Officers shouted contradictory orders while sailors scrambled to man guns. Among them stood a tall figure in the gold-braided uniform of a senior captain, Reginald Frost. Even at a distance, she recognized him. The same proud bearing, the same cold eyes that had watched impassively as her father was led to the gallows. The ships collided with a thunderous crash. Grappling hooks flew, binding the vessels together as Hawthorne led the boarding party across. Eleanor found herself following, driven by a force stronger than fear. The deck of the Intrepid became a chaos of clashing steel and pistol fire. Naval Marines formed disciplined lines, their red coats bright against the ship's pale deck, but the pirates fought with the desperate ferocity of men who knew capture meant the noose. Eleanor stayed close to Thomas and Barrett, moving through the melee toward the quarterdeck, where Frost directed his men. Twice she fired her pistol at Marines who charged them, and once she parried a bayonet thrust with her cutlass, the impact numbing her arm. Through the smoke and confusion, she spotted Hawthorne locked in combat with two naval officers. He dispatched one with a pistol shot, but the other's blade slipped past his guard, opening a gash across his ribs. Before she could reach him, a familiar voice froze her in place. Miss Blackwood, how unexpected. Captain Frost stood before her, sword drawn, his thin lips curved in a cold smile. Around his neck hung a gold watch chain, her father's timepiece, taken as a trophy after his execution. Captain, she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. Or should I say traitor? Frost's smile vanished. Bold words from a pirate's whore. Bold words from a man who condemned an innocent to death. She raised her cutlass. My father trusted you. Your father was a fool who didn't understand the necessities of empire. Frost advanced slowly. Some must be sacrificed for the greater good. Was it for the greater good that you sold naval secrets to the Spanish, that you betrayed your oath? Surprise flickered in his eyes. You know nothing, girl. I know enough. She circled warily. I know about the conspiracy, about my uncle's involvement, about the documents you carry. Frost lunged suddenly, his blade whistling toward her throat. Eleanor parried desperately, the force of his attack driving her back against the rail. You'll join your father soon enough, he snarled, pressing his advantage. A pistol shot rang out. Frost staggered, blood blossoming on his shoulder. Isabella stood several paces away, smoke curling from the barrel of her weapon. The next one goes through your heart, she warned. Eleanor seized the moment, knocking Frost's sword aside and placing her blade against his throat. The documents, she demanded. Where are they? Hatred burned in his eyes, but survival instinct prevailed. My cabin, hidden compartment beneath the desk. As Eleanor held him at sword point, the battle around them began to turn. The Intrepid's crew, seeing their captain captured, fought with less conviction. Meanwhile, the other naval vessels had become entangled with each other while maneuvering in the narrow channel. Eleanor, Hawthorne's voice cut through the chaos. He fought his way to her side, blood seeping from his wound. Are you hurt? No, she indicated Frost with a nod. He says the documents are in his cabin. Hawthorne's eyes hardened as he recognized the gold watch chain. You kept it as a trophy, he said softly. You'll answer for that. A massive explosion rocked the ship. Flames erupted from the Intrepid's hold. The powder magazine, someone shouted. Back to the Serpent, Hawthorne ordered. Now! As they retreated across the boarding planks, dragging Frost with them, Eleanor glanced back at the burning frigate. Her father's evidence, the proof that might have cleared his name, was disappearing into fire and smoke. Beside her, Hawthorne swayed suddenly, his face pale beneath the grime of battle. James? She grasped his arm. He collapsed to the deck, blood pooling beneath him. Blood seeped through Eleanor's fingers as she pressed a wadded cloth against Hawthorne's wound. The captain lay unconscious on Barrett's operating table, his normally tanned skin ashen from blood loss. The blade nicked an artery, Barrett explained grimly, threading a curved needle. Hold that compress firmly while I prepare to stitch him. The doctor's small cabin had been transformed into a surgery. Shelves of medicinal herbs and tinctures lined the walls. Barrett's prized collection gathered from ports across the Caribbean. He selected a small clay pot containing a green paste with a pungent odor. Rare moss from the inland mountains, he explained, applying it around the wound. Stops bleeding and prevents corruption. Eleanor nodded, maintaining pressure as instructed. Outside, she could hear the crew securing their prisoner and setting course away from the naval vessels, which remained occupied with rescuing survivors from the burning Intrepid. Will he live? She asked quietly. Barrett's hands never paused in their skilled work. If infection doesn't set in, if he's strong enough, he glanced up briefly. He's survived worse. Hours passed as Barrett cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Eleanor assisted silently, following his instructions with steady hands despite her exhaustion. When they finished, Hawthorne's breathing had steadied, though he remained unconscious. Now we wait, Barrett said, washing blood from his hands. You should rest. I'll stay with him. The doctor didn't argue. He arranged a chair beside the cot, then left to check on other wounded crew members. Alone with Hawthorne, Eleanor studied his face, relaxed now in unconsciousness. Without his customary guarded expression, he looked younger, more like the idealistic naval officer he must have been before her father's execution changed his path. You promised me answers, she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear. You don't get to die before providing them. The door opened quietly, admitting Isabella. She carried a steaming mug that she offered to Eleanor. Herbal tea, Barrett's recommendation. She glanced at Hawthorne's still form. How is our fearsome captain? Alive. For now. Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. Thank you for what you did today. With Frost. Isabella shrugged elegantly. I didn't do it for you. For him, then? Eleanor nodded toward Hawthorne. Perhaps. Isabella settled on a stool, arranging her skirts. Or perhaps I simply despise men like Frost, who believe their uniform grants them divine right to judge others. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, two women from different worlds united temporarily by circumstances neither had foreseen. You love him, Isabella observed finally. Eleanor nearly choked on her tea. Captain Hawthorne? I barely know him. Yet you followed him into battle, tended his wounds, and now keep vigil at his bedside." Isabella's smile was knowing. "Knowledge and love are not the same thing, my dear." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Hawthorne stirred, a low groan escaping his lips. Both women leaned forward as his eyes flickered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "The ship?" he rasped. "Safe," Eleanor assured him. "We're well away from the Navy vessels." "Frost?" "Secured in the hold," Isabella replied, though the documents were lost when the Intrepid caught fire. Disappointment crossed his face. "All of them?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and withdrew her father's gold watch, reclaimed from Frost during the battle. "Not quite all." She pressed the hidden catch on the timepiece, revealing a small compartment containing a tightly folded piece of paper. "My father's secret hiding place. Frost never knew." With trembling fingers, Hawthorne unfolded the document, a list of names, dates, and ships, written in Thomas Blackwood's precise hand. "This proves the conspiracy," he breathed. "Not everything we hoped for, but enough to pursue the others involved." "Including my uncle?" "Especially him." Hawthorne attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Lie still, you fool," Isabella chided. "Your heroics nearly got you killed." "Wouldn't be the first time." His eyes met Eleanor's. "You faced Frost." "I did." "Good." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Thomas would be proud." The simple words affected her more deeply than she expected. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away, unwilling to break down in front of Isabella. The governor's daughter rose gracefully. "I'll leave you two to your moment. The crew will want news of their captain's condition." After she departed, silence settled between them, comfortable and intimate in a way Eleanor hadn't anticipated. "I thought I'd lost you," she admitted finally. "It would take more than a naval officer's blade to kill me." Despite his weak condition, a hint of his usual confidence returned. "Though I must say, waking to find both you and Isabella at my bedside was unexpected. She helped save your life, mine too, perhaps." "Isabella follows her own compass," he shifted, grimacing. "Never assume you know her true heading." Over the next 3 days, Hawthorne's condition improved steadily under Barrett's care. The ship maintained its course toward a secluded cove, known only to the captain and his most trusted men, a place to recover and plan their next move. Word spread through the crew of Eleanor's confrontation with Frost and her role in capturing him. The same men who had once viewed her with suspicion now nodded respectfully when she passed. Even Silas seemed to have tempered his hostility, though his eyes still tracked her movements with unsettling intensity. On the 4th evening, with Hawthorne finally able to sit up and take solid food, Barrett declared him out of immediate danger. "You'll need rest to fully recover," the doctor warned. "No heroics for at least a fortnight." Hawthorne scoffed, but the pallor that remained beneath his tan suggested he wouldn't argue too strenuously. When Barrett left them alone, Eleanor seated herself on the edge of the cot. "The crew has elected me quartermaster," she announced. Hawthorne's eyebrows rose. "In my absence? What of Silas?" "Mysteriously absent during critical moments of the battle, according to several accounts." She shrugged. "The vote wasn't even close." A slow smile spread across his face. "Thomas always said you had leadership in your blood." He reached for her hand. "I should have told you everything from the beginning. About your father, about my promise to him." "You can tell me now," she said softly. "We have time." His fingers entwined with hers as night fell beyond the cabin windows, bringing a rare peace to the Crimson Serpent and its wounded captain. The Crimson Serpent's return to Isla de los Secretos was met with an ominous silence. No harbour master hailed them, no guard boats approached to escort them to dock. The bustling waterfront that had greeted them weeks before now appeared eerily deserted. "I don't like this," Thomas muttered, standing beside Eleanor at the rail. "Feels like a trap." Eleanor nodded, scanning the silent docks. As quartermaster, she'd ordered extra ammunition distributed and stationed their best marksmen in the rigging. Hawthorne, still recovering but now able to walk short distances, joined them at the bow. "Santiago's colors are missing," he observed, pointing to the fortress where the governor's personal flag had once flown. In its place hung the Union Jack, the Royal Navy's presence now openly declared. We should leave, Barrett suggested. Whatever alliance you hope to renew with Santiago is clearly broken. Hawthorne's expression hardened. We need supplies and information, and I won't run at the first sign of trouble. It's not the first sign, Isabella interjected, approaching with quiet grace. It's the final one. My father has made his choice. She gestured toward the harbour, where naval officers could now be seen moving among the buildings. Admiral Blackwood arrived 3 days ago. Santiago wasted no time pledging his loyalty. Eleanor felt a chill at the mention of her uncle's name. The Admiral is here, personally, with his flagship and 2 supporting vessels. Isabella's dark eyes met hers. He's hunting you both now, not just James. The escape of his prized captain and the destruction of the Intrepid has made this very personal. Hawthorne studied the harbour intently. We still need supplies. There's a small cove on the western side of the island. Less defensible, but it might give us access without immediately announcing our presence. I know it, Isabella confirmed. Local fishermen use it during storms. There's a path up the cliff to the village. You're coming ashore with us? Eleanor asked in surprise. A bitter smile crossed Isabella's face. My father sold me along with his loyalty. A marriage alliance with one of Blackwood's officers to cement their partnership. She straightened her spine proudly. I declined the honour. Hawthorne gave orders to circumnavigate the island, keeping well offshore to avoid detection. By dusk, they had anchored in the hidden cove, and a small party prepared to go ashore. Hawthorne, despite Barrett's objections, Eleanor, Isabella, and 3 trusted crewmen, including Thomas. We go in, gather what intelligence we can, secure supplies, and return before dawn, Hawthorne instructed. No unnecessary risks. The village, perched on the cliffs above the cove, was little more than a cluster of fishermen's huts, but it offered a discreet vantage point to observe the main settlement. From a decrepit tavern on the village outskirts, they watched naval patrols moving through the streets below. 6 ships in harbour, Thomas reported, returning from reconnaissance. 3 are navy, including a first-rate with admiral's pennant. The others are merchant vessels, probably pressed into service. Any sign of Santiago? Hawthorne asked. In the fortress, hosting the admiral for dinner, according to local gossip. They've posted doubled guards at all approaches. Isabella, who had been conversing quietly with the tavern keeper in fluent Spanish, rejoined them. My father has provided Blackwood with detailed maps of all pirate havens in the Caribbean. They're systematically targeting each one. Eleanor felt sick. How many have fallen? 3 so far. Dozens of pirates hanged. Isabella's expression was grim. This is no ordinary patrol. It's an extermination. Their hushed conference was interrupted by the arrival of a group of naval officers entering the tavern. The pirates froze, hands moving instinctively to weapons concealed beneath cloaks. At ease, Hawthorne murmured. Keep your faces down and stay calm. The officers settled at a table across the room, ordering rum with the entitled manner of men accustomed to deference. Their conversation, loudly conducted without concern for local ears, proved unexpectedly revealing. The admiral's determined to have Hawthorne's head, one lieutenant declared, offered £500 for information leading to his capture. It's the girl he wants most, countered an older officer, his own niece turned pirate. Blackwood won't rest until she's dealt with. Family honour and all that. Seems excessive for one ship and a handful of pirates, remarked a third. The older officer leaned forward. It's not about the pirates, it's about what they know. The Admiral has powerful friends in London who can't afford certain documents coming to light. Eleanor and Hawthorne exchanged glances. The conspiracy reached higher than they had realized. The officers continued drinking, their tongues loosened by alcohol. They spoke of the Admiral's plans, a coordinated sweep of known pirate haunts, new patrol routes, weaponry being distributed to merchant vessels. One detail seized Eleanor's attention, a chess set on display in Santiago's mansion, its pieces carved to resemble pirates and naval officers. The governor and admiral spend hours at it, the lieutenant said, planning their strategy like it's a game. As the night wore on, the officers eventually departed, leaving the companions to digest what they'd learned. We need to warn the other havens, Thomas insisted. We will, Hawthorne agreed. But first, we need those maps Santiago provided. Without knowing which locations are compromised, any warning will be too little, too late. The maps will be in the fortress, Isabella said. In my father's study or the war room. Then that's where we're going. Hawthorne turned to Eleanor. This is beyond personal vengeance now. Your uncle's purge could cost hundreds of lives, not just pirates, but the entire communities that depend on them. How do we get into the fortress? Eleanor asked. You heard them doubled guards at every approach. Isabella smiled, a dangerous glint in her eye. There's one approach they won't be guarding. My private entrance, created years ago for discreet visitors. You'd betray your own father? Thomas asked incredulously. My father betrayed himself when he sold his honor to Admiral Blackwood. Isabella's voice was ice. Besides, he was quite willing to sacrifice me. I'm merely returning the favor. As they prepared to leave, a commotion erupted in the street outside. Through the grimy window they watched a patrol, dragging a struggling prisoner toward the harbor. Silas Reed, his face bloodied but defiant. Your missing quartermaster appears to have found employment elsewhere, Isabella observed. Hawthorne's expression darkened. Silas knows every detail of our operations, every hiding place, every ally. Then we have no time to waste, Eleanor said grimly. By dawn, my uncle will know everything Silas does. They slipped from the tavern into the darkness, following Isabella toward the looming fortress, where, in a lamplit chamber, two men moved carved pieces across a checkered board, plotting the destruction of an entire way of life. Isabella led them through a maze of narrow alleys behind the fortress, eventually stopping at what appeared to be a solid stone wall covered with climbing vines. She pressed a particular stone, revealing a cunningly disguised door, barely wide enough for one person to slip through. My father never knew about this, she whispered. An old smuggler's tunnel from when the fortress was first built. I discovered it as a child. One by one, they squeezed through the opening and followed her down a damp, narrow passage, lit only by the small lantern she carried. The air grew thick with the scent of mold and salt water as they descended. The tunnel connects to the fortress cellars, Isabella explained. From there, we can access the main building through the servants' passages. Hawthorne moved with obvious discomfort, one hand occasionally pressing against his healing wound. Eleanor stayed close behind him, ready to offer support if needed, though she knew he would reject it if offered openly. They emerged into a wine cellar, its walls lined with dusty bottles and barrels. Isabella extinguished the lantern and led them to a narrow staircase. The guards change rotation at midnight, she said, checking an ornate pocket watch. We have 20 minutes to reach my father's study. Moving silently through the servants' corridors, they avoided the main halls where naval officers and Santiago's men patrolled. Twice they froze in darkened alcoves as guards passed, their hearts pounding in their chests. Isabella's intimate knowledge of the fortress proved invaluable. She guided them through shortcuts and hidden passages until they reached a heavy oak door near the top of the eastern tower. My father's private study, she breathed, removing a key from a chain around her neck. He changes the locks regularly, but always keeps the pattern the same. The key turned with a soft click. Inside, the governor's study spoke of both wealth and strategic mind, fine furnishings arranged with military precision, maps and charts covering the walls, and a massive desk dominated by ledgers and correspondence. The maps, Hawthorne murmured, moving immediately to a large sea chart spread across a side table. Red ink marked various locations throughout the Caribbean, the pirate havens Santiago had betrayed. Thomas stood guard at the door, while Eleanor and Hawthorne examined the documents. Isabella moved to her father's desk, rifling through papers with practiced efficiency. Here, she said suddenly, holding up a sealed document. Orders for the next phase of the Admiral's campaign. They're targeting Libertalia 3 days from now. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Libertalia, the largest and most established of the pirate settlements, housed over 1,000 souls, not just pirates, but craftsmen, merchants, and their families. We need to warn them, she said urgently. We will. Hawthorne carefully rolled up the maps. But first, we need to. The study door swung open. Governor Santiago stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand and cold fury in his eyes. Behind him loomed Admiral Reginald Blackwood in full-dress uniform, his resemblance to Eleanor unmistakable despite his hard expression. "I thought you might return," Santiago said, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "Though I didn't expect such blatant treachery from my own blood." Isabella straightened, chin lifted in defiance. "I learned from the master." Blackwood stepped forward, studying Eleanor with clinical detachment. "My brother's daughter. You have his eyes." No emotion colored his voice. "I've spent considerable resources hunting you down." "To silence me," Eleanor replied evenly, "as you silenced my father. Your father was a fool who didn't understand the necessities of empire." The same words Frost had used. "Some sacrifices are required for the greater good." "Is that how you justify betraying your own brother, your own blood?" A flash of something, perhaps regret, crossed Blackwood's features before his expression hardened again. Thomas was weak, sentimental. He would have exposed operations vital to England's interests in the Caribbean. Smuggling, extortion, murder. Hawthorne's voice was dangerously soft. "Strange definition of England's interests, Admiral." Blackwood's cold gaze shifted to him. "Captain James Hawthorne." The promising naval officer turned pirate. His lip curled. Such a waste of potential. "Enough pleasantries," Santiago interrupted, gesturing with his pistol. "Guards are on their way. Your little rescue mission ends here." Thomas tensed, ready to fight, but Hawthorne shook his head slightly. They were outmatched, outnumbered, with no clear escape. "The maps," Blackwood demanded, holding out his hand. Eleanor glanced at Hawthorne, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. She handed over the rolled charts, her mind racing for options. "And now, the letter," Santiago added, looking at his daughter. Isabella's hand closed protectively around the document she'd found. "This doesn't need to end in bloodshed, Father. That decision was made when you chose pirates over family." Santiago's expression was stone. "Admiral Blackwood has kindly offered to take you to England. You'll be married to a respectable gentleman, and forget this unfortunate chapter." "I'd rather die," Isabella hissed. "That can be arranged," Blackwood said coldly, "for all of you." The sound of booted feet in the corridor announced the arrival of guards. Santiago smiled thinly. "Take them to the cells," he ordered as red-coated Marines filled the doorway. "Except my daughter. She stays under house arrest until arrangements can be made for her departure." As guards moved to separate them, Isabella suddenly lunged toward the fireplace, tossing the sealed orders into the flames. Santiago shouted in rage, firing his pistol. The shot went wide, splintering the wooden mantel. The distraction was all they needed. Thomas tackled the nearest guard, while Hawthorne disarmed another. Eleanor grabbed a heavy brass candlestick, striking a Marine across the temple. Chaos erupted in the confined space. Pistols fired, swords clashed, bodies grappled in desperate combat. Eleanor found herself back-to-back with Isabella, fighting Marines with a ferocity born of desperation. "The ceremony sword!" Isabella shouted over the din, pointing to an ornate blade mounted on the wall behind Santiago's desk. "It's the captain's symbol of authority." Understanding instantly, Eleanor fought her way across the room and seized the ceremonial sword, a magnificent weapon with a jeweled hilt and finely etched blade. It felt perfectly balanced in her hand, responding as if made for her. Through the melee, she spotted Blackwood attempting to flee with the maps. With strength she didn't know she possessed, Eleanor pursued him into the corridor, the captain's sword raised for battle. The Crimson Serpent limped through turbulent waters, its sails tattered and hull scarred from cannon fire. Eleanor stood at the helm, hands steady on the wheel despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. 3 days had passed since their desperate escape from Isla de los Secretos, 3 days of running battles, hasty repairs, and too little sleep. Below deck, Dr. Barrett fought a different battle. Hawthorne lay in his cabin, fever raging through his body as infection took hold of his reopened wound. During their flight from the fortress, he had taken a bayonet thrust meant for Eleanor, the blade piercing dangerously close to his earlier injury. "Land ahead," called the lookout. "Libertalia on the horizon." A ragged cheer went up from the weary crew. The pirate sanctuary represented their last hope, both for refuge and to warn of Blackwood's impending attack. Eleanor relinquished the wheel to Thomas and made her way below. In the captain's cabin, Barrett bent over Hawthorne's still form, applying fresh poultices to the angry red wound. "Any change?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Barrett shook his head. "The fever still holds him. I've tried every remedy in my knowledge." He gestured to a small metal box containing various herbs and compounds. "This is my last resort, a mixture used by native healers, powerful but dangerous." Isabella sat in the corner, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled from days without proper rest. During their escape, she had proven herself both fierce fighter and loyal ally, even taking a pistol ball in her arm while covering their retreat to the ship. "He's strong," she said, watching Hawthorne's labored breathing. "He survived when we thought him lost before." Eleanor approached the bed, taking Hawthorne's burning hand in hers. His skin felt like fire against her palm, his pulse rapid and uneven beneath her fingers. "James," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "We've reached Libertalia. The crew needs its captain." No response came from his still features. Barrett administered the native remedy, carefully tipping the dark liquid between Hawthorne's parched lips. "Now we wait," the doctor said. "A few hours will tell us if he fights his way back or—" He left the alternative unspoken. As Barrett and Isabella left to prepare for their arrival at Libertalia, Eleanor remained at Hawthorne's bedside. The weight of command had fallen to her as quartermaster, and decisions awaited that would affect not just their crew but potentially hundreds of others at the pirate haven. "You can't leave me to face this alone," she whispered, stroking his fevered brow. "I need you, James, not just as captain." On impulse, she retrieved a small metal rod from his desk, part of the ship's repair materials. With determined movements, she bent it into a rough circle, working the metal until it formed a crude ring. Barrett returned to find her slipping the makeshift band onto Hawthorne's finger. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. "Something foolish, perhaps." She didn't look up, "but if he's to die, he won't do so alone. And if he lives—" She finally raised her eyes to Barrett's. "Then I'll have a promise to keep." Understanding softened the doctor's weathered features. "I'll perform the ceremony if you wish it." Eleanor nodded, emotion tightening her throat. With only Barrett as witness, she spoke simple vows over Hawthorne's unconscious form, pledging herself to a man who might never wake to honor his part of the exchange. The doctor pronounced them husband and wife with solemn dignity, then left her to her vigil. As darkness fell, Libertalia's lights appeared on the horizon, hundreds of lanterns marking docks, homes, and fortifications built by those who lived beyond society's laws. The pirate haven was larger than Eleanor had imagined, nearly a proper town, with structures of wood and stone rising up the hillsides. The Crimson Serpent dropped anchor in the natural harbor, surrounded by vessels of every description. Word of their arrival and their warning spread quickly. Soon, a delegation of pirate captains came aboard to hear their news directly. Eleanor met them on deck, the ceremonial sword from Santiago's study now strapped to her hip. Isabella stood at her side, her arm bandaged but her bearing proud as ever. "Where is Hawthorne?" demanded a grizzled captain with a silver hook in place of his left hand. "Fighting for his life below," Eleanor replied evenly. "I am Eleanor Blackwood, his quartermaster and wife, and I speak with his authority." Skeptical murmurs rippled through the delegation until Thomas stepped forward. "She faced Admiral Blackwood himself and escaped to bring warning," he declared. "The entire crew follows her command." The captains exchanged glances, then the hook-handed man nodded. "Speak then, Mrs. Hawthorne. What news is worth summoning the Brethren Council?" Eleanor outlined what they had discovered: Blackwood's systematic campaign, Santiago's betrayal, the maps marking every pirate haven in the Caribbean. "Libertalia is his next target," she concluded. 3 days from now, at least 5 Royal Navy warships will appear on that horizon. They mean to make an example of this place. "We've faced Navy ships before," a female captain with dark skin and intricate braids responded. "Our fortifications are strong." "Not against this," Isabella interjected, stepping forward. My father provided them with detailed charts of your harbor defenses, your cannon placements, even your underwater barriers. This revelation hit home. The captain's expressions darkened as they realized the extent of their vulnerability. We have two choices, Eleanor continued. Abandon Libertalia before they arrive, or stand and fight on our terms, not theirs. And what terms would those be? Asked the hook-handed captain. Eleanor smiled grimly. They expect to find us here, waiting like targets. Instead, we bring the battle to them, at a place of our choosing. As the night deepened, strategies were debated and alliances formed. Eleanor moved between the ship and the council meetings ashore, dividing her time between preparing for war and sitting with Hawthorne during the critical hours of his fever. Dawn broke on the second day with a single moment of hope. Hawthorne's fever finally broke, his breathing easing into a more natural rhythm. Barrett pronounced the crisis past, though recovery would be slow. He'll live, the doctor assured her, though he won't be fighting any battles soon. Exhausted but relieved, Eleanor finally allowed herself a few hours of rest. She slept beside Hawthorne's bed, her hand still clasping his. The crude metal rings binding them together in a union neither had anticipated when they first met on the deck of the Crimson Serpent. Sunlight streamed through the open window of the hillside cottage, casting warm patterns across the bed where Hawthorne sat propped against pillows. Colour had returned to his face, though he remained weaker than he would admit. "This is madness," he insisted, studying the battle plans spread before him. "Blackwood commands 5 warships, each with twice our guns." 6 ships now, Eleanor corrected, adjusting the map to show the vessels' positions. "Our scout returned this morning. The HMS Vengeance joined his fleet yesterday." Hawthorne frowned. "All the more reason this strategy is too risky. It's our only chance." Eleanor traced the narrow channel leading to the hidden cove they'd selected as their battleground. "They expect us huddled behind Libertalia's walls. Instead, we'll meet them here, where their numbers work against them." Over the 4 days since their arrival, Libertalia had transformed from pirate haven to war camp. 8 captains had pledged their ships to the cause, forming what they now called the Brethren Fleet. Under Eleanor's direction, they had prepared an unconventional defense that relied more on strategy than raw firepower. A knock at the door interrupted their debate. Isabella entered, followed by the assembled pirate captains who would lead the coming battle. "The lookout reports Blackwood's fleet has changed course," she announced without preamble. "They'll reach the outer islands by nightfall." "Sooner than expected," Eleanor noted, making mental calculations. "We need to sail with the evening tide to reach position by dawn." Captain Amara, the fierce woman with braided hair who commanded the fastest ship in their fleet, studied the map intently. "The Serpent will lead the vanguard." Eleanor nodded. "With the Swift Gull and Redemption flanking, the rest will remain hidden in the cove until signaled." "And who commands the Serpent?" The question came from Captain Flint, a grey-bearded veteran who had initially been the most skeptical of Eleanor's leadership. "No offense to you, Mrs. Hawthorne, but coordinating 8 ships in battle requires experience." "I will command," Hawthorne stated firmly, attempting to sit straighter despite the pain evident in his eyes. "You can barely stand," Barrett objected. "The wound could reopen at any moment." A tense silence fell over the room as the captains exchanged uncertain glances. Leadership in battle was sacred among pirates. A captain unable to fight risked losing respect and authority. Eleanor made a swift decision. Moving to a sea chest in the corner, she withdrew a newly crafted flag, crimson fabric, emblazoned with a black swan, entwined with a serpent. "This is no longer about one ship or one captain," she declared. "We fight as one fleet against a common enemy." She unfurled the flag fully, under one symbol. The gesture was not lost on the assembled captains. A new flag represented a new identity, something beyond individual vessels or commanders. "The Brethren Fleet sails under joint command," she continued. "Captain Hawthorne's experience and my knowledge of Blackwood's tactics combined." Hawthorne's eyes met hers across the room, surprise giving way to understanding, and then pride. She had found a solution that preserved his dignity while acknowledging reality. "I can support that," Amara said first, followed by nods from the others. "Then it's settled," Eleanor concluded. "We sail tonight. Prepare your ships and crews." As the captains departed to make final preparations, Isabella lingered behind. Over the past days, the governor's daughter had proven herself invaluable, her knowledge of naval protocols and signals providing crucial intelligence. "Your uncle will not expect this level of coordination," she observed. "Pirates are not known for unified strategy." "That's our advantage," Eleanor replied. "He thinks he's hunting scattered prey. Instead, he'll face organized resistance." Isabella nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The merchant connections I contacted in Port Royal have agreed to help. Several sympathetic officials and traders will testify about the corruption if we succeed." "If we survive," Hawthorne added grimly. "When we survive," Eleanor corrected, squeezing his hand. The crude metal rings on their fingers caught the sunlight, a reminder of vows spoken in desperation, but now embraced with determination. Barrett entered with fresh bandages and medicines. "I've prepared a special kit for the battle," he told Eleanor. "Treatments for common wounds, clearly labeled. Each ship will have one." "Thank you." She touched his arm gratefully. "For everything." As evening approached, Eleanor helped Hawthorne dress in his captain's coat. Though he required Barrett's assistance to walk, his presence on deck would be vital for morale. Together they made their way to the harbor where the Crimson Serpent waited, freshly repaired and loaded with supplies. The crew stood at attention as they boarded, faces solemn but determined. Thomas greeted them at the gangplank. "All preparations complete, Captain. Quartermaster." He nodded to each in turn, acknowledging their shared command. Hawthorne was helped to a specially constructed chair near the helm, positioned to give him view of both the ship's operations and the surrounding waters. Eleanor took her place beside him, the ceremonial sword now a familiar weight at her hip. "Signal the fleet," she ordered, as the sun touched the horizon. "We sail with the tide." One by one, the pirate vessels slipped from Libertalia's harbor, moving in formation toward the Narrows, where they would meet Admiral Blackwood's squadron. The new flag, the Crimson Serpent entwined with a black swan, flew from each mainmast, uniting them in purpose. As darkness fell, Eleanor stood at the bow, watching stars emerge above the darkening sea. Behind her, Hawthorne spoke quietly with Barrett and Thomas, reviewing their strategy one final time. "Your father would be proud," Isabella said, joining her at the rail. "Not just of your courage, but of what you've built here." She gestured to the ships following in their wake. "You've given them something to fight for beyond survival." Eleanor's hand touched the hilt of her sword. "Tomorrow will determine whether it was worth the cost." "Some things are worth any cost," Isabella replied softly, her gaze drifting to where Hawthorne sat in the gathering darkness. "I think perhaps you've discovered that." As the Crimson Serpent cut through the night waters, Eleanor found herself thinking not of the battle to come, but of quiet moments Hawthorne teaching her navigation, their dance at Santiago's ball, his face in firelight as he spoke of her father. Somehow, amid chaos and danger, something unexpected had bloomed between them, something worth fighting for, worth living for. Dawn would bring Admiral Blackwood's warships and a reckoning long overdue. But tonight, beneath stars that had guided sailors for centuries, Eleanor Blackwood sailed toward her destiny with clear purpose and, for the first time since her father's death, genuine hope. Dawn broke with ominous beauty over the narrow channel between two small, uninhabited islands. Mist clung to the water's surface, transforming the 8 pirate vessels into ghostly silhouettes as they took their positions. Eleanor stood on the Crimson Serpent's quarterdeck, spyglass trained on the horizon, where Admiral Blackwood's fleet would soon appear. "They've taken the bait," Thomas reported, returning from a scouting mission in a small pinnace. "All 6 Royal Navy ships are approaching in battle formation." Hawthorne nodded from his position near the helm. Though still weak, he wore his captain's coat with dignity, his presence alone bolstering the crew's confidence. "And the fire ships?" "In position, hidden behind the eastern reef. Captains Flint and Rodrigo await your signal." Eleanor lowered the spyglass, satisfaction warming her despite the morning chill. The plan had required precise timing and coordination, unlike anything pirates typically attempted. 2 ships had been sacrificed, stripped of valuables and packed with pitch, powder, and other combustibles to be used as floating infernos against Blackwood's larger vessels. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Final positions." Coloured flags ran up the mainmast, relaying commands to the scattered pirate ships. Some anchored in the shallows, presenting only their strongest broadside to the approaching channel. Others concealed themselves behind rocky outcroppings, ready to emerge and trap the naval vessels once they committed to the narrow passage. "They're coming into view," Isabella called from her lookout position in the rigging. Through the dissipating mist, the first naval vessel appeared, HMS Vengeance, an imposing ship of the line, with 3 gun decks and the Admiral's pennant flying proudly from its masthead. Behind it sailed 5 more warships in tight formation, their polished brass gleaming in the morning sunday. "Admiral Blackwood has always been predictable," Eleanor observed. "Front-loaded power, overwhelming force. It served him well in conventional battles," Hawthorne replied. "Today he learns the cost of underestimating his enemy." As the naval fleet approached the channel's entrance, a single cannon fired from the Crimson Serpent, not aimed at the enemy, but straight into the air. The signal. Immediately, the hidden pirates sprang their trap. The 2 fireships, previously concealed, were set alight and allowed to drift with the incoming tide directly toward the lead vessels. Simultaneously, Captain Amara's swift gull emerged from behind the western island, firing chain shot that tore through the rigging of the rearmost naval ship. Confusion erupted among the naval vessels as they found themselves caught in the narrow channel, unable to maneuver properly with the fireships approaching and their formation now disrupted from behind. Admiral Blackwood's response was visible. Even at a distance, frantic signals flew from the Vengeance, ordering evasive action. But in the confined space, ships collided with each other and the surrounding reefs as they attempted to turn. "Now!" Eleanor commanded. The Crimson Serpent surged forward, joined by the Redemption and 2 other pirate vessels, creating a wall of broadsides that pounded the disorganized naval ships. The sound was deafening cannon fire, splintering wood, and the screams of wounded men echoing across the water. Through her spyglass, Eleanor spotted her uncle on the quarterdeck of the Vengeance, his expression a mask of fury as he realized the trap he'd sailed into. Their eyes met across the distance, recognition passing between them despite the chaos. "The Admiral's ship is turning toward us," Thomas warned. "They mean to board." "Let them come," Hawthorne replied, drawing his sword despite Barrett's protests. "It's time," Admiral Blackwood answered for his crimes. The Vengeance loomed larger, its massive hull dwarfing the Crimson Serpent as it maneuvered alongside. Grappling hooks flew, binding the ships together. Marines lined the naval vessel's rails, muskets and pistols at the ready. "Prepare to repel boarders," Eleanor shouted, drawing the ceremonial sword. Its blade caught the morning light, momentarily blinding the nearest Marines. The first wave of naval officers swarmed across, meeting fierce resistance from the pirate crew. Eleanor found herself in the thick of the fight, the sword in her hand moving as if with a will of its own. Years of anger, grief, and determination fueled each strike as she cut a path toward the gangplank where her uncle would cross. Thomas fought at her side, while Isabella provided covering fire with deadly accuracy from an elevated position near the mainmast. Hawthorne, despite his wound, directed the defense from the quarterdeck, pistol in hand. "Eleanor!" Barrett's warning cry came too late. A naval officer had circled behind her, cutlass raised for a killing blow. She turned, knowing she couldn't parry in time. The officer jerked backward, a knife protruding from his throat. Silas Reed stood behind him, bloodied but alive. "Escaped during the confusion," he explained gruffly. "Thought you might need an extra sword." Before Eleanor could respond, a commanding voice cut through the din of battle. "Enough! Lower your weapons or watch your captain die." Admiral Blackwood stood on the gangplank between the ships, pistol aimed directly at Hawthorne's head. 2 Marines held the wounded captain, who had finally collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. "Uncle," Eleanor acknowledged coldly, stepping forward with her sword still raised. "This ends today." "Indeed it does, niece." Blackwood's smile was without warmth. "Though not as you imagine. Surrender your vessel, and I may be merciful." "Mercy?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. Like the mercy you showed my father? Your father was weak. He would have exposed operations vital to England's interests for his precious morality. Blackwood's expression hardened. Drop your weapon, Eleanor. Now. Or watch another man you love die because of your stubbornness. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor assessed her options. Around them, the battle continued, ships burning, men dying, the future of Libertalia hanging in the balance. You're right about one thing, she said finally. This ends today. With a swift motion, she threw her sword not at her uncle, but at the thick rope securing the main grappling hook. The ceremonial blade, forged of finest steel, sliced through the hemp as if it were silk. The sudden release sent men tumbling as the ships lurched apart. Blackwood staggered, his pistol firing harmlessly into the air. In the moment of confusion, Isabella shot one of the Marines holding Hawthorne, while Silas tackled the other. Eleanor seized a fallen boarding axe and leapt the widening gap between the vessels, landing hard on the Vengeance's deck directly before her startled uncle. Thomas Blackwood was twice the man you'll ever be, she declared, raising the axe, and his daughter is your reckoning. Morning sunlight spilled across the harbour of Port Royal, glinting off the freshly painted hull of the Crimson Swan. The newly christened vessel bore little resemblance to the pirate ship it had once been, its black flag replaced with a letter of marque, its reputation transformed from predator to protector of English merchant shipping. Eleanor stood on the quarterdeck, dressed not in the practical sailor's garb of recent months, but in a gown of deep blue that complemented her eyes. The wind caught her hair, now grown long enough to be properly styled, as she surveyed the busy waterfront with a commander's attention to detail. "The last of the supplies are aboard, Captain," Thomas reported, using her official title with a hint of amusement. "We sail with the afternoon tide." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." She smiled at the irony of their reversed positions. Once a deckhand under his guidance, she now commanded the ship they had fought so hard to save. 3 months had passed since the battle that changed everything, 3 months of testimony, negotiation, and carefully reconstructed alliances. Admiral Blackwood now awaited trial in London, his conspiracy exposed by the very documents he had sought to destroy. Captain Frost had turned King's evidence, trading testimony for a reduced sentence that would still see him imprisoned for years. The door to the captain's cabin opened, and Hawthorne emerged. His recovery had been slow but steady, the deep wound finally healed enough for him to move without pain. In his hands, he carried a leather-bound logbook, its first page inscribed with Captain Eleanor Hawthorne in his precise handwriting. "A gift for our maiden voyage as privateers," he explained, presenting it to her. "Though I suspect you've already begun planning our course." "West by southwest," she confirmed. "Governor Richards believes Spanish treasure ships are operating beyond their usual routes." Hawthorne nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Following the battle, the new governor of Jamaica, a practical man untainted by the previous corruption, had recognized the potential in transforming notorious pirates into legitimate privateers. The letter of marque he had secured for them allowed them to hunt enemy vessels legally, with the Crown's blessing and protection. "Isabella sends her regards," Hawthorne added, producing a sealed letter. "Her testimony was instrumental in convincing the Admiralty of your father's innocence." Eleanor tucked the letter away for later reading. The governor's daughter had returned to Spain after the battle, leveraging her father's disgrace to secure her independence and a modest inheritance. Her occasional correspondence suggested she had found a measure of happiness away from the shadows of Santiago's influence. "And Barrett?" she asked, noting the doctor's absence from the bustling preparations. Ashore until the last moment, the hospital director requested his expertise for a difficult case. Hawthorne smiled. "Our good doctor now consults officially when we're in port. His knowledge of tropical ailments has earned him quite a reputation." Eleanor's gaze swept across the harbour to where several other vessels flew the same distinctive flag as the Crimson Swan. The Crimson Serpent entwined with a black swan, now the recognized symbol of their small fleet of privateers. Former pirates who had fought alongside them at Libertalia had been offered similar commissions, creating an unprecedented alliance that patrolled the Caribbean under official sanction. "Your father would be proud," Hawthorne said softly, following her gaze. His name cleared, his vision of fair trade in these waters becoming reality through you. Eleanor touched the gold watch that now hung from a chain at her waist, her father's timepiece, reclaimed and restored. He always said justice would prevail, even if the path to it wasn't straight. The ship's bell rang, signaling the hour of departure. Crew members took their positions with practiced efficiency, many of them veterans of their pirate days, now adapting to the more structured life of privateers. Barrett arrived just as the gangplank was being raised, medical bag in hand and apologies on his lips. Eleanor waved away his concerns, knowing his dedication to healing transcended all other duties. "Are you ready, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Silas called from his position as boatswain. The former quartermaster had found redemption in the final battle, his betrayal forgiven if not forgotten. Under Eleanor's command, he had discovered a loyalty he'd never known in his checkered past. "Ready, Mr. Reed." She turned to Hawthorne. "And you, husband? Does our new course meet with your approval?" He took her hand. The simple metal bands they had forged in crisis, now replaced with proper gold rings that caught the Caribbean Sunday. "I follow where you lead, Captain, as I have since the day you stepped aboard, disguised as a cabin boy." The memory brought a smile to her lips. Who would have thought a woman scrubbing decks would end up commanding the ship? "I suspected your true worth from the beginning," he replied, the warmth in his eyes belying his formal tone. "Though I admit, I didn't anticipate quite how thoroughly you would capture the vessel or its captain." As the Crimson Swan glided from the harbor into open waters, Eleanor took the wheel, feeling the familiar surge of the ship beneath her hands. Hawthorne stood at her side, his steady presence a reminder of all they had overcome together. On the horizon, adventure awaited not as fugitives or pirates, but as respected privateers with a purpose beyond mere survival. The wind filled their sails, carrying them toward a future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed. "What lies beyond that horizon, do you think?" Eleanor asked, nodding toward the endless blue expanse before them. Hawthorne's hand covered hers on the wheel. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Behind them, Port Royal receded into the distance. Before them stretched infinite possibilities, a legend already taking shape among sailors who spoke in hushed tones of the pirate queen who had brought justice to the Caribbean and the captain who had given up his ship for love. And above them flew their flag, the Crimson Serpent and Black Swan, entwined in perfect balance, carrying their story on the wind to shores yet undiscovered.